Everybody. Welcome to the Coffee Chat. I'm Andy Bozarth, Community Outreach and Advocacy Director for AARP Kansas, and today I'm joined by Marci Penner, who's the Director of the Inman-based Kansas Sampler Foundation. Good morning, Marci.
Hi there. I'm still dancing to your intro.
Oh, that's kind of a fun little intro, get everybody kind of jazzed up about what we're going to be doing. So hopefully it helps. Are you having a good day? I know the weather's just beautiful in Kansas.
Awesome. I'm going to go on a walk later. I love it. I was pretty tired of that cold snap.
Oh, me too. I'm really glad to have nice weather this week. And for those of you who don't know Marci, she and her dad, Milford, started the nonprofit Kansas Sampler Foundation in 1993. And the mission of the foundation is to preserve and sustain rural culture. And some of the most known projects are their Kansas Guidebook, the Kansas Explorers Club, the 8 Wonders of Kansas, the Kansas Sampler Festival, the Big Kansas Road Trip, the Big Rural Brainstorm, and many conferences and workshops. So as you can see, Marci does things big. So Marci, can you tell me a little bit about the history of how you and your dad decided to start this foundation?
You bet. I had been an elementary school guidance counselor in the Philadelphia area for 5 years and moved back to Kansas in 1990. And Dad and I started driving around the state to write our first guidebook. And there were 2 things that we noticed. One was that Kansans didn't know their own state very well. And we were finding all these fabulous things and we wanted to share them. And the other thing was that, we'd go into towns and visit with people, and some small towns were doing fabulous things that should be shared with other small towns, but there wasn't a good network on how to do that. So we formed the foundation to do 2 things. One is to educate Kansans about Kansas and increase pride and get people motoring around the state. And the other was to network and support rural communities. And I want to add, Andy, because I know you have listeners from all over, of the 626 incorporated cities in Kansas, 3/4 are volunteer-led. So 1,500 population and smaller. So that means they don't have anyone paid to worry about how to sustain a town. It's all on the shoulders of volunteer. And that number 1,500 is just not exact. But lots of small towns that needed connected from the grassroots level.
That's great. And what a great way to do this. I mean, AARP is a volunteer-run organization also, and we're very committed to keeping communities livable for people of all ages. So what kind of experience do you have with rural communities through the organization?
So for about these 30 years, I've been, first of all, I grew up in a rural community of about 1,100. And for these last 2 guidebooks that we did, the last one with co-author Wendy Rao, we went to every incorporated city in Kansas. So I've been that journey twice. And you start to get to know similarities, common issues, things that are different, things that are working, things that aren't. And I've just been immersed, and I still currently live outside of a small town. So I'm rural by choice. I'm Kansas by choice. Though I grew up in Kansas. And I think that's an important, powerful phrase, rural by choice. So I kind of gravitate to people who feel that way.
I like that, rural by choice. I'm going to remember that and use that in the future. One of the programs that you're actually working on right now is called Kansas Power Up and Go, and that's to find some information about why people are rural by choice, or why people who used to be rural have moved away. Can you tell me a little bit about that program?
First of all, where does that phrase "power up" come from? So on my journey around the state in the early 2000s, I noticed that towns that had people between the ages of 21 to 39 as leaders or business people more active in the community, those were the towns that were thriving. So we started the Power Up movement to sort of encourage, empower, connect those young people in rural communities. So this project, the Kansas Power Up and Go, is a partnership with the Lieutenant Governor's Office of Rural Prosperity. And the whole goal is to figure out how to recruit and retain young people in rural communities. So they're looking for policy and programming ideas, and the Kansas Sampler Foundation is looking for grassroots projects we can do. So I get to interview young people between those ages, 21 to 39, from all across the state. I've had 450 submit surveys, and I think I did my 162nd interview yesterday.
Wow. So people are really responding to this.
Yes. And so I ask these people questions about what they like living about, what they like about living in their rural community, or what they don't like, what they think is needed, what would help them live their best life, how we can recruit young people, should we, all those things. So it's, I just go wherever that particular person's interests are, or find out what they might be glad to share their perspective about. So 162 times awesome. It's been fabulous.
It sounds like really interesting information. Are you finding any commonalities?
Yes. So clearly the top 3 issues we need to work on in rural communities, and maybe of larger size too, are housing, childcare, and access to high-speed internet. So, childcare is at crisis proportion to the effect that some people are choosing not to have kids, or they're waiting to have a second baby or a first until a slot opens on the waiting list in the child care center, if the town is lucky enough to have one. So childcare is definitely in crisis proportion, but lots of great agencies are working on that. But another one that I think is good to bring up here is that 2 things. One is how a young person or anybody is welcomed into a community, whether they come back or whether they're there for the first time. We sometimes just don't think about how it is for someone new moving in. But I can tell you it would make a very positive impact if you take cookies over, just go introduce yourself, invite them to an event. To feel welcome means you're recognized and that you're starting to be part of a community. And in small towns, we sometimes are a little cliquey, not because we mean to be, I don't think, but we just stay in our comfort zone. The other thing I just quickly want to mention, Andy, is that it's that struggle between keeping traditions alive and knowing when to maybe change or listen to a younger voice or a new voice, or think maybe we could do things a little differently. And so, that's the struggle sometimes between the generations, sometimes just between mindsets. And I think that's something to work on if we're serious about sustaining our rural community.
Wow, very good insights. People may be asking, why is AARP giving information on a project that's for people under 40? And AARP is very invested in livable communities and keeping communities livable for people of all ages. And part of that is, as people age, and a lot of our rural communities are what are considered older communities, we need to make sure there's that intergenerational balance and people to help care for our older population. And we can only do that by finding out what will bring younger people to the communities. What can we do to save these small towns?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that in the early 2000s, I was telling you when I started to meet all these young people, we called our effort the Power Up Movement, because the whole idea was to listen to younger voices to help improve the community for every age. And, some communities are just going to die, but it has nothing to do, in my mind, with the population. It has everything to do with the will and gumption of the people that live there, of the cohesiveness with which they get along. So one thing I've noticed over time is that communities that are cohesive are much more likely to succeed. In communities that include newcomers. So we came up with this plan, which we for now call the 8 to 98 plan. How could we get everybody involved in the community from the ages of 8 to 98 to become a productive member of the community? And so it would be all about community mapping to find out the skills and the talents and the resources, the knowledge base of everybody from 8 to 98. I mean, maybe a 90-year-old can hem pants, and this young guy has to go to an interview. He's a bachelor and he needs his pants hemmed. And so the connector would look on the list of all the skills and, oh, this lady here, she could hem your pants for you. And so and then the guy goes and he gets the job, and now this 90-year-old feels like she made a difference, like she helped this guy get a job. And that's just a very simple example that to match community needs with skills and talents through a connector, like an agent, whether it's we need more people to help with this bean feed or this church supper or this car show, to just helping an older person clean their gutters or mow the lawn or go to the grocery store and carry things. I think people would feel excited to help each other. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely think people like to help each other. It's volunteering is on the rise, and Kansas has a really high percentage of people who volunteer all the time. And I think definitely you are on the right track. One of my favorite ways to say why people need to work together from 8 to 98, I'll use your age times, is that the same things are needed for somebody who's using a walker that are needed for somebody who's using a stroller. And that's kind of our concept for livable communities with AARP. We want to make sure everybody in a community is comfortable and they're all interacting together. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Andy Bozarth, Director of Community Outreach and Advocacy for AARP Kansas, and I'm joined by Marci Penner, who is the Director of Kansas Sampler Foundation. So if you have any questions about how you can reinvigorate your small rural town, or if you have some ideas that you can share with us, I'm sure Marci would be happy to take those questions. Just put them into the chat box. And Marci, we do have some comments and some questions. There is a comment that says, love Kansas by choice. That's one of I'm going to stick with that too. And the next question is the 898 plan feeds on the traditional culture of small towns, bartering and sharing and trading skills. So I think you're onto something with the 8 to 98, because that is how small towns work. I grew up in a small town, true confession here, and it was a great way to grow up. Small towns have a lot of benefits that people don't think about. And I think one of the things that COVID has shown us is that people can work from anywhere as long as they have access to broadband. And another true confession, AARP Kansas is working on expansion of broadband in Kansas through legislative action. So if you are interested in learning more about that, go to aarp.org/KS and look up our advocacy issues. Let's see. The way that I came to know about your organization was through the Office of Rural Prosperity. And can you tell me a little bit about how you are connected to that office?
This is through the Lieutenant Governor's office. And so the Lieutenant Governor at the time, you hear that feedback?
I am hearing that feedback.
Something I'm doing?
Actually, I think if you hold your microphone a little closer to your mouth, if you can.
Okay.
That cuts out the feedback.
Okay, we'll try that.
Thank you.
That's better. Okay, so the Lieutenant Governor at the time was Lynn Rogers, and we kept being on the same panels together, and he kept hearing me talk about power-ups. And one day he just said, why don't you give me a proposal, and maybe we can work together on something. So that office was created to, because the governor, Laura Kelly, knew that we needed to really beef up rural Kansas and work on a lot of issues. So she sort of handed that off to the Lieutenant Governor's office, and that's why this new Office of Rural Prosperity was created. So they're looking at a lot of issues, from broadband to childcare to so many things, and our partnership is just one piece of what they're doing. But they're wonderful people to work with. They're very interested in what's going on in rural and always have an open ear for anything that the public wants to share with them.
They're wonderful people over there at the office. They really are. Why do you think rural communities are so important to our state?
Because people live in them. People choose to live there. Our colleges are filled with young people from rural communities. And people, there's the myth that there's only a brain drain, that only young people are leaving. Well, they're also coming back. And I'm talking to very passionate young people who love living in communities, even when these communities don't have everything they'd like them to have. But they're safe, they know their neighbors, their kids can walk around. In a school, their kids can be involved in all sorts of things, and almost anybody can be on a sports team. You don't have to have gone to a camp since you're 6 years old to make a team in a small town. So it's really great. And Andy, I've been concentrating on young people, a voice that's sort of been ignored. But I think that's true for older folks as well. Sometime after they retire, they're just maybe ignored. And I think what we want to do with this 8 to 98 plan is beef up those contributions of older folks as well. And they still want to be involved and feel like they're a part of the community. And, Kansas has so many communities with older people, aging population. So we need to be the best in the world at taking care of our older folks in rural communities. Come on,
I agree.
So many older folks live there. Let's be awesome and let's take care of each other. And I think it's just sort of an awareness of what we need to do, how every person in a community is important. When you have a small population, every person is important, and you want to make them feel like they're a part of moving a community forward.
Definitely. For those of you who are just watching or just joining us, if you have a comment or a question, please put that into the chat box. And maybe one of the things you can discuss is say yes or no. Were you raised in a rural community? We do have a question again. And that question is, speaking of broadband expansion, do you have any plans around intergenerational training on using the internet or safe online use?
You know what? I'm going to leave that to AARP.
You know what? We are working on that.
Yeah, you might. That's one I'm going to pass off to you guys who can do it best.
Thank you. You know what? We may reach out to you though, because you have the rural expertise and we have that intergenerational thing going on.
Yeah, sounds great.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was all the data that you are collecting, and with that information, will people be able to access that information, or what are you doing with it once you find it?
That's a great question about public access. What I do know at this time is that so one of the outcomes will be to give actionables to the Office of Rural Prosperity in hopes of finding some policy or programming that can be put into place through the state government. The Kansas Sampler Foundation will do lots of grassroots efforts. I know we'll have duologues and workshops and conferences and all sorts of networking to, take these talented people we've found and expose the public and the world of community development to their great thoughts. But yeah, somehow we need to make what we find publicly accessible. I know we'll be sharing things on Facebook and through our e-blasts. And people can talk to me at Marci at kansassampler.org if they'd like to be connected with us in some way. But we'll find a way, Andy. This is too great of information to not share it. I'm just so enthused about what I'm hearing.
It's wonderful. And if people want to go out and fill out the questionnaire, where do they go?
Okay, 21 to 39s only. Otherwise it'll blow up my inbox. And so they could go to kansassampler.org and then go to what we do, and you'll find the Kansas Power Up and Go link, and there's a survey form in that link. And I think you're scrolling it on the trailer there. So
we are. We have put that up there. And also, I had fun going out to just kansassampler.org, kansassampler.org, and looking at everything you do, because we're just touching the tip of the iceberg on this conversation. I think I'd like to have you come back and talk a little bit more on everything Kansas has to offer. We have another comment in the comment section. And this one says, Marci, you are recognized as a true expert on this for Kansas. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, whoever said that. I always think it is teamwork. I'm sometimes the voice, but there's a whole team behind this effort.
Definitely a good team. So I'm going to encourage people to go out to kansassampler.org and see everything that your organization is doing. And if you are between the ages of 21 and 39, or if your children or grandchildren are between the ages of 21 and 39, send them out there, because the more information that Marci can get, the better we can do to keep these rural communities alive and thriving. And how do we go about improving our communities for all ages, Marci? We want these communities to live and be vibrant.
I'm finding out that sidewalks are a big issue. We need sidewalks. So that's something that I'll be talking to the Office of Rural Prosperity about. But what about this? How there's elks and Rotary and Lions, and libraries are doing some of what I'm going to mention. Libraries are such a key to the health of a rural community, but lifelong learning clubs, I think, would be good. Some people are starved for intellectual stimulation, and they want to learn different languages. They want to learn how to, play a ukulele. They want to do all sorts of different things. And sometime in a rural community, we get a little tunnel vision with sports or, just a few categories. And if we just do that community mapping, we'll find out all sorts of knowledge bases in a community that could be shared. But Andy, I want to mention how your listeners could help rural community. Can I go there for a second?
Absolutely.
The reason we do Kansas guidebooks and the Big Kansas Road Trip and did the Kansas Sampler Festival is to create an audience for rural. We figure that to help them get out into these small towns helps make them more aware of what's going on in small towns, what cool restaurants these towns have. So we encourage the public to get out, explore, eat in locally owned restaurants, shop in locally owned stores, and don't judge a town from its cover, because sometimes there's reasons that a town might not look great, but behind the scenes, if you judge it, you might be missing some tremendous efforts going on to help improve the town and do some really great things. So, but we need to clean up our towns. That's something we also should do to, improve that impression. So it's a big team. The public can go buy things and, learn about small towns, go to the museum, thank the volunteers. Grocery stores, we need more people to buy things from small town grocery stores so we can keep them open. Buy stamps at small town post offices. Lots of things we can do.
There are lots of things. I think of road trip when when we're talking. And is it safe for people to go out and just drive to a rural community? Will they be welcomed?
Well, here's what I think now during this still COVID time.
Right.
So many places to go that, like, you could go to Maxwell Wildlife Refuge and just drive through the free-range buffalo pasture. So there's places all over this state you can go to enjoy rural without going into stores even. But if you do go into the stores, wear a mask, even if they aren't. Just, we got to help. We all have to be a team player here to help keep things safe. But we have noticed that there are as many people road tripping around Kansas now as ever, because they're not going on cruises or flying somewhere else. They're just exploring the state. We've been sending guidebooks out the door like crazy. And
that's wonderful.
May 6 to 9, we have our Big Kansas Road Trip in Brown, Doniphan, and Nemaha counties. And we'll see what the safety precautions need to be at that time. But if nothing else, we'll just all drive around those beautiful back roads. And there's, we can do things safely.
And Kansas is a beautiful state. I want to point that out. There is a lot of diversity in the landscape. It's just a really pretty state when you get out there and drive. And you're getting lots of love, Marci.
Oh, I'll take it.
This is a comment to me. It says, Andy, this may be one of the best programs done this year that I have watched. And that's with one of our regular viewers. And then Ellis, Kansas is getting some love. Would be a great place to come in the western part of the state. And it says Ellis is a little bit more free-spirited. So that is one of our viewers out from that part of the state.
Well, and when you go to Ellis, look on the intersections. They paint giant sunflowers in the middle of the intersection. This is the home of Walter Chrysler. You can go tour his home as well.
Wow. Now, if I throw out any town, are you going to have little tidbits about that?
Yeah.
That's great. You were talking a little bit about all the activities that towns can do, and I'm going to throw out a shameless plug here for the AARP Community Challenge Grants. You can put that out if you're a small town or a large town, and you have an idea to build up your community. Go to aarp.org/challenge grants, and these are relatively small grants that are for projects that can be completed in a short period of time, like by the end of the year. So go again, that's aarp.org/challenge grants, or you can find it on the AARP Kansas website at aarp.org/KS. And Marci, I think we are about at the end of our time. So do you have any last bits of advice for people interested in finding out more about Kansas?
Well, you know, even if you don't have one of our guidebooks or the many brochures around the state, just get out there and start exploring. Just take a road you've never been on before. And Andy, it's been great to be on with you. I think every one of your viewers could give me some good advice, and so I'm open to that if they want to contact me. The only way we learn is from listening to each other. So glad to do that.
That's wonderful advice. And I'd like to have you come back and talk about some of the road trips in the 8 Wonders of Kansas at some point in the future, and we'll have to talk about that again. For those of you just joining, or for those of you who've been watching, join next week, and we will be talking about the expansion of broadband to rural Kansas. So thank you again, Marci, and thank you all for watching us.